Welcome to the Tipping Point Show. I'm Jimmy Evans. I'm so thankful that you've joined me today. I have Bill Koenig joining me today, and we're going to be talking about Israel, all things Israel. There are so many things happening, and I want you to stay tuned for this. Let me remind you that on September the 16th, we have our prophecy conference coming up. It's going to be all day long. We have Rabbi Jonathan Kahn. We have Pastor Ed Young. We have Dr. Tony Evans, myself, Dr. Mark Hitchcock. It's going to be a great day. We want you to be there. Go to endtimes.com and just look there under our conferences and you'll see all the details, and we have reserved seating. So go on there. If you're a paid subscriber to endtimes.com, you get a 50% discount. If you're bringing a group of 10 or more from a church or something, you get a 40% discount. So be sure and go on there. We would love to have you come, but our seats are filling up. You can see actually on our map there, you can see exactly the seats are full. And those that are filling up, I want you to get a good seat, so be sure and sign up as quickly as you can. I'm very excited today to have Bill Koenig joining me. I've mentioned his book, Eye to Eye, here many times on the show. We're going to be talking about it today on the program here. Bill is a journalist and served as a White House correspondent. He has a news service called Koenig World Watch Daily. His website has constantly updated stories from a large variety of news sources and can be found at watch.org. I read it daily for world news from a biblical and end times perspective. And Bill, it's great to have you with me today.
Thank you, Jimmy. Great to be with you.
Well, you have such a passion for Israel. You work on the Israel prayer breakfast, right?
Absolutely.
And so those go on through the year at different places. Is that right?
Yeah, Jerusalem prayer breakfast started in 2017, usually in June, 1st of June, thereabouts in Jerusalem. And then it's been in Houston, Brazil, St. Louis, Dallas last year. So yeah, it moves around the world. And what's interesting about the Jerusalem prayer breakfast, it always seems to happen at an important time in the country where it's hosted.
I appreciate your passion concerning Israel and Jerusalem, the prayer breakfast. If someone wants to get more information about that, where could they do that?
They can go to Google and put in Google a Jerusalem prayer breakfast, Jerusalem. That's the main website, and all that information will be clicked on right there at Google.
Well, there's a lot going on right now concerning Israel, and I've had a lot of people asking me, and I was waiting to get you on the show so you give the right answer. You were actually supposed to be in Israel right now.
Right.
You're there regularly. There are so many things, and we were mentioning before the show, it's just like a pressure cooker right now, of just from all angles. There's just so much pressure building on Israel. What do you think when you look at Jerusalem, when you look at Israel right now? Where do you think we are prophetically? Just your personal opinion.
Jimmy, I've been at this for 26 years. I've seen it ebb and flow over the years, and right around 2000 was significant. Then with 2001, with the terror events of 9/11, the pressure that was being applied on Israel at the time, Bush, Ariel Sharon was involved, Crown Prince Abdullah, that was an intense time. And then there was a lot of pressure during Obama's 2 terms to make peace. John Kerry and Hillary Clinton were very involved in that, and then there was tension in the area at that time. But the big problem all along, Iran. That's been we watch Iran, Jimmy. We obviously watch Iran, we watch Turkey, we watch Russia. But I think that Iran is talking with much bravado right now. They're developing a nuclear program.
Yeah.
They are burying it deeper and deeper in the sands of Iran. And I think it's, they're deploying missiles in Yemen, Iraq, Lebanon, and Syria. That's more serious than the rockets. I mean, there are 150,000 rockets right now pointed at Israel, but 15,000 missiles in Lebanon and Syria, that's a concern. So that's, I watch Iran closely. Pastor W.A. Criswell down at First Baptist used to always say, if you want to know where things are standing biblically and prophetically, watch what's happening with Jerusalem, God's time clock.
Right.
That's what we do, but also Iran is a major player that we keep a close eye on. Prophetic significance.
And so you were saying they're burying what Iran is saying is they're going to be able to bury their nuclear facilities in those mountains to where the bunker busters don't work. But you're saying that Israel's got a way around that.
Yeah, it was interesting because over the last few years, we've provided Israel a lot of bunker busting bombs. And the purpose of that was to be able to penetrate those facilities that they're building under the ground, bearing their nuclear program or missiles and deployment of missiles. But A good friend of mine, Yorm Ettinger, used to be a consulate general down in Houston for Israel and also worked out of the Israeli embassy in Washington, told me, he said, we received the bunker busting bombs and then we improved them significantly. And so we're not concerned. So I think Israel probably knows exactly the depth of those with their intel, and they'll be prepared for that. But, you know, Iran thinks they're going to be able to bury underneath and the bunker busters won't be able to hit them, but they'll get there.
Well, it's like the Stuxnet virus.
Right.
They're in all those facilities. They've got moles. Israel has moles in all those facilities. You know that.
Yes.
Now, so what do you think, Bill? Because it seems to me like, you know, when Benny Gantz was the defense minister there in Israel, like 2 years ago, he said they'll have nuclear weapons in 3 weeks, you know. And I mentioned it here on the show, and I think everybody got up in a tizzy. I think I got them up in a tizzy because, you know, this is the defense minister. Well, there's so much hype and so much rhetoric that goes on. However, Iran has been at this for a long time. They've defied the world community. They have not allowed the scrutiny of the United Nations or the groups involved in that. So what do you think timing-wise? It just doesn't seem to me like Israel has a lot of time to wait. They have the missiles, they have the capability today that they didn't have 2 years ago to strike Israel with a nuclear missile. And so what do you think as far as timing is concerned? How critical is the timing? And do you see Israel preemptively bombing Iran anytime soon?
That's a good question, Jimmy. Probably the one that I have the most interest in right now is what is the red line? I remember in the summer of 2016, Russia, Syria, and Iran had troops fairly close to Israel's northern border.
Right.
And Ambassador Crocker, who had been for us there in Iraq, and Ambassador Jeffers, who had operated out of Syria, said that Israel's really close to the red line being crossed. They really felt that summer was a real critical stage, especially with that troop movement. And then the word was getting out that Israel was going to do something. And then there was a retreat of those soldiers, and then things calmed down. So there was a defined red line at that time. And I think there is definitely a red line in place right now. No one's on the world stage speaks more effectively than Benjamin Netanyahu about the Iranian threat. I was there in Capitol Hill when he spoke to Congress. I think it was 2015, and warned of the threat of Iran. He knows what the problem is. His challenge previously was to get the defense community to back him, his defense minister and others to back him. And with that said, I do know that probably the reason Netanyahu's back in office is 75 to 80% of the Israelis want him to be the prime minister in the time of a conflict with Iran.
Right.
So what's important is to get the defense industry or defense establishment behind him. In some ways, they're very concerned about a war with a very significant big country. That's also, those are the Persians are very smart people as well.
Yes, they are.
And I think, Jimmy, I hope it's not Israel's gift over the years has been the gift of preemptive strikes, hitting before thought, hitting before known. And I'm concerned in that kind of dynamic between Netanyahu and the defense establishment. They might take a hit first and then be forced to respond. So I hope Israel can respond first and not have to do something preemptively. Some of my friends that are also pretty close to the situation are concerned about a Tel Aviv hit and then the fulfillment of Isaiah 17:1, where Damascus will no longer exist as a city.
Right.
I think that's a scenario you probably have thought of that as well, Jimmy. I think so it really boils down, we're really close to that red line right now. What will happen for something to cause that red line to be crossed or something, or at least a motivation to do something?
Well, Jeremiah 49, the Elam, it's the prophecy against Elam, southern Iran, where Elam says, I'm going to knock the bow. God says, I'm going to knock the bow out of your hand. I'm going to judge your princes, not the people necessarily. But it's interesting there because it says in southern Iran there, when this happens, there won't be a country in the world where someone from Iran doesn't end up in. In other words, it's going to be off limits to humanity after this strike occurs. Well, that's where a lot of their nuclear facilities are. It's where a lot of their missile launchers are there. And we've had Bill Salas on the show, and he does a lot of this. But it makes sense when they had the Chariots of Fire exercise last year with the United States, and they had all their military branches. Israel had all their military branches planning a preemptive strike against Iran, followed by defending their borders. Okay, so you have the Psalm 83 war. You have the Jeremiah 49 war against. It's not necessarily a war against Iran. It's a judgment against Iran. But just imagine that Israel bombed southern Iran, and the Bushehr nuclear facility, the missile launchers that are there, it became a nuclear waste zone. Immediately followed by a regional war, which is Psalm 83. Now, I think Psalm 83 could have been fulfilled in the War of Independence. But Psalm 83 is all the regional actors, including Jordan, including Egypt, and all these. Once the strike happens, they attack, followed by Isaiah 17:1, the Damascus, and Gog and Magog. So it can happen in about a week.
Absolutely, Jimmy. And Bill Salas and I have been on Jeremiah 49, 35 through 39 for quite a while. Bill's done the most comprehensive teaching on that. And that's a prophecy that kind of slipped through. And over the last couple of years, Salas, myself, and a few others have really focused on you as well on that. It's very significant. And I think what's also significant when you look at that scripture is it looks like many people are going to come to know the Lord.
Yes.
During that time of attack. This is another opportunity of the favor of God with the Persians for many of them to come to Jesus. So I think it has a very significant event. And like Bill says, it's in the southern part of Iraq, which you mentioned, Jimmy. And I think that's where Iran will be smacked. I don't think the United States will be part of it, even though the United States and Iran are doing some things right now, military maneuvers, and basically telling Iran, back off. It'll probably be Israel. And then, obviously, the Gog-Magog will be Iran once again.
Well, Bill said that the believers of Iran are so excited about that happening because they can't wait to go to another part of the world to tell somebody about Jesus.
Oh, absolutely. They're passionate.
Yeah. There revival's happening in Iran, which is amazing. One of my friends over in Egypt who had the largest church in the Middle East, I said, so then they go all over the Middle East. They have sporting events where they evangelize Muslims. And I said, so wait a minute, so you have these sporting events, you talk about Jesus? He said, oh yeah, very openly. And I said, they don't get mad? He said, not if you have a sporting event. He said, these men come and anything, they'll motorcycle jump in and all this kind of stuff.
Oh, that's awesome.
And they talk about Jesus. And I said, well, where's the easiest place to get people saved? He said, Iran. Because it's the Islamic Republic of Iran, and it's horrible, and the people hate it, and they're so disillusioned with Islam because of the government there. And so they're looking for something else. And Jesus is appearing to people in the Middle East.
That's right. According to Tom Doyle, Tom's a Dallas guy, a Dallas seminary guy, and Tom and his wife Joanne have done tremendous work throughout the Middle East. Tom's written a couple books with Thomas Nelson of exactly that, Jimmy, where Jesus is appearing to people in dreams and even some cases physically.
Yes.
And that's, it's a difficult place to share the gospel. And so Christ is going directly to them.
Can't keep Jesus out.
No, you can't, even there.
Well, let's talk about Ukraine for just a minute. Now, the prophecy, the Ezekiel 37 and 38 prophecy against Gog, that's a man. Okay, and then Magog, the land of Gog. And then you have Meshech, Tubal, Persia, Iran, you have Togarmah, all these places that are in Turkey today. So all these nations are in place. They're all aligned, philosophically and politically with Russia. Russia's the strong man. So a lot of people, and I have a lot of questions about the Ukraine and Vladimir Putin. Now, this is just totally my opinion, but I believe if the Ezekiel 37 and 38 prophecy is one that is current, that's going to happen in the next few years, Vladimir Putin's a Gog. I mean, he is. Now, if it's later, somebody else is going to have to take his place. But he's I think from a friend of mine, I was interviewing a friend of mine, I'm not going to say his name, in Russia a few weeks ago. They like Putin over there pretty much because they see him as a restraining force of the moral degradation of the West.
Right.
Now that's a funny thing to say.
No, it's true.
But it's true. Because he doesn't allow a lot of the nonsense that we allow.
No.
But at the same time, he is expansionary, he's tyrannical, he wants to reestablish the former Soviet Union. So what do you see as an end game for Ukraine? I noticed this morning that the drones were attacking Moscow. These attack drones were attacking Moscow. So what do you see? Do you see an end game here for Putin? Do you see an end game for that war?
Yes, that is so interesting because Israel's had a good relationship with Russia, but the war in the Ukraine has actually created tension in that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
One of the top intel guys, Mordecai Kadar in Tel Aviv, said Netanyahu could pick up a phone and be in Putin's office within 24 hours almost any time, and if he couldn't meet there, he would talk.
Right.
They had such a good relationship. And then there was some tension during Bennett and Lapid's time in office as top leaders of Israel. And so that was a tense moment. And then when Israel voted with the Ukraine.
That's right.
At the UN, that created a lot of tension between Russia and Israel that had not been there. At that time, Israel had the right to go in and deal with go in and out of Syria and take out Iran nuclear missile shipments and military shipments. So I remember the foreign minister said, Russian foreign minister says Israel doesn't have the right to declare sovereignty over the Golan Heights.
Yeah, there you go.
Which Trump was very adamant about that Israel has that. So they all of a sudden this tension started developing over, and Zelensky was asking Israel, we need your help. We need more sophisticated equipment. We need your intel, and we also need your defense system to be able to counter the Iranian drones that the Russians are now using.
Right.
And that created additional pressure on Israel. But what happened, it's just amazing how all this is being weaved together. Iran and Russia are closer now than they have probably ever been militarily.
Yeah.
I remember when I was in Jerusalem in November, talked to a pastor from the Caucasian Mountains, and he said Russia and Iran are having a lot of behind-the-scenes negotiations on how to cooperate more militarily, having to do with the Ukraine. And at the same time, Iran would be buying Russian military equipment. So through this Ukraine situation, Russia and Turkey are closer.
Yeah.
Russia and Iran are closer. But especially the Iran-Russia relationship is being merged and formed in a way that it hasn't been in the past. And that's obviously, Jimmy, beginning of alignment, even further alignment of the Gog-Magog force.
Yeah, and the natural gas, when you look at Ezekiel 37, and it says you come for booty and plunder, when they attack, it says there's two reasons that is listed there is why the Gog and Magog coalition invades Israel. One is booty and plunder, and the other is to come against a land that was uninhabited and is now inhabited. In other words, the Russians want the natural gas. 31 trillion cubic feet of natural gas in the Mediterranean, off the Mediterranean
Absolutely.
coast. But the Muslims want the land, and they want Jerusalem back.
That's right.
And so you have two separate agendas. You have these, and so it is an Islamic coalition except for Russia.
Right.
And so Russia has their own interest in that. They also want, obviously, a seaport on the Mediterranean and all the riches that come with that there. So one of the things that I look at, Bill, is Putin has been horribly embarrassed. And so everyone would have said, I remember when Mitt Romney was running for president, and he was talking about Russia being a major threat. But they are a regional power. They're not the economy of Russia is smaller than the economy of Texas. So they don't have a huge economy. The main thing they have is the Soviet era nuclear weapons.
Absolutely.
And that's their, that's their go-to. They, threaten to nuke anybody who looks at them. But Putin has been embarrassed by the conventional war that's being waged in the Ukraine. And Russia's been damaged. They've lost, I don't know how many soldiers, they've lost a bunch. And so at the same time that he's been embarrassed here and they've suffered military setbacks, he's also suffered economic setbacks because the Europeans shut off the gas pipe from Russia, and the Nord Stream pipeline was destroyed and all that. So now you have Israel making deals with Europe to be their supplier. They're supplying Egypt, they're supplying other areas, but there's a lot of money and a lot of influence there. The Gog and Magog war is heating up. It's going to happen someday. But the Gog and Magog war is heating up. And again, if this is a current prophecy that's going to happen in the near future, I think Putin's in the right frame of mind.
Absolutely. I think when you have Russian leaders talk about their nukes, Medvedev, former president of Russia, Lavrov alluding to it, Putin alluding to it.
Right.
Why are they mentioning this? And the other thing, Putin's a chess player. He's very strategic. He's a lot weaker than most people thought. General Kellogg was on Fox News a couple of months back, and he said basically, Russia's so weak economically, it's like Belarus with nuclear weapons. I'm sure Russia didn't like hearing that, but he said, "Oh, look, they're not much of a threat." But they have, what was so interesting about the Ukraine, our media, our secular mainstream media was doing everything they could to provoke Biden into getting into this conflict.
Oh, yeah.
And the same thing with the European press. We're trying to get NATO more involved.
Yeah.
If that was a Republican president like Trump or Bush, I don't think that would have happened that way. But I'm going, what are they doing?
Throwing billions and billions and billions of dollars at it.
The weaponry.
It's amazing. I don't think in modern times, of course, there hasn't been that type of provocation since World War II. And so, it is unprecedented in that regard. But the world, the atomic clock, the doomsday clock began this. I think it was at 100 seconds to midnight, and they've moved that up.
That's right.
To like 60 seconds from midnight, because when you look at it just from a secular perspective, it's a dangerous world right now.
It is.
There's just a lot of danger out there. Of course, exactly what the Bible said would happen at the end. Let's talk for just a minute about the United Nations and the Biden administration. Now, you wrote this book, Eye to Eye. I want you to give an update here in just a minute, because last time we were together, you were telling me that, there are 124 specific examples in the book, I think.
126.
126 of specific times that the United States has tried to pressure Israel to give up land, and historic natural disasters that have happened. Hurricane Katrina is an example of this. But there have been a lot that have happened since your book was written. I want to talk about that in just a minute. We're pressuring, the United States and the United Nations is pressuring Israel to try to agree to a two-state solution. Okay. Now, your book, the subtitle of your book is Facing the Consequences of Dividing Israel. Okay, Joel 3 says, I'm mad because you're dividing up my land.
That's right.
So, and you know more about this than anybody. And by the way, this is Bill's book, Eye to Eye, William Koenig. And so go to Amazon to get this book. What's your website?
Watch.org, W-A-T-C.
Watch.org and get this book. And in other words, if you have somebody arguing with you, the thing I love about Bill's book is it just documents that you're a journalist. And so it's just documented here. There's no argument to it. This is what happened actually in the American history. And so we are presently trying to pressure Israel into giving up East Jerusalem, the West Bank, the Golan Heights, and it's horrific. This tiny little nation, they don't have much land. And we were there in December, and we went to the Golan Heights, this unbelievably beautiful strategic area.
Oh, absolutely.
And whoever has that is looking right down on Israel.
Absolutely.
And when Syria had it the last time, they used it in 1967 war to bomb Israel. So we're trying to pressure them, and Trump recognized Golan Heights as belonging to Israel. So if East Jerusalem, I believe there's 200,000 Jews that lose their homes in East Jerusalem, 400,000 Jews will lose their homes in the West Bank, and so on and so forth. So what do you see happening right now, Bill, because you're very much in touch with what's happening there, with the Biden administration, with the United Nations? How heated is this getting?
It's starting to become focused again. I'll summarize some of the things that are happening right now. Number one, we had a EU envoy from Germany that was in Israel recently, stating that there's no such thing as Israel's claim to Area A, B, and C. That's A's all given to the Palestinians. B, most of B has been given, but Israel still controls security. And C, Israel still controls all that land, where a lot of the communities, the settlement communities are.
Right.
So here, this EU statement saying Israel has no claim to Area A, B, and C is a shot against the bow. This is where they're coming from. And now the Biden administration feels semi-empowered that there's a possibility of normalization relationship between Israel and the Saudis. And they're going to use two things: stop the judicial reform, and at the same time also, move forward with the two-state plan. So the two-state plan normalization those are no wins for Israel.
Right.
But that's what they're going to attempt to do. So we'll see this summer into the fall a pressure by the Biden administration to get back to the peace table, and they're going to use the caveat of the carrot being peace talks, but leading to normalization talks. Israel wants normalization with the Saudis. So Biden says, okay, if those two things happen. The other thing is, this is really interesting. They just had a recent Arab League meeting in Saudi Arabia. And Abbas, the Palestinian leader, who's in his about the 17th year of a 4-year term, was there.
Exactly.
I think it was 2005. So 18th year of 18th year now of a 4-year term, and he was able to get a commitment from Crown Prince bin Salman, MBS, to once again bring the Palestinian issue to the forefront. It kind of moved away when Trump was in office. But now, and to Abbas's glee, they are the Arab League is now once again putting the Israeli-Palestinian issue at the top of the heap, which Abbas was obviously very pleased about. And MBS, Crown Prince bin Salman, even stated, this is critical. It is still as important now as ever before.
And the Biden administration is pressuring Israel to make a deal with the Saudis for them to be at peace, for America to strengthen their ties with Israel. They want Israel to strengthen their ties with the Saudis.
Exactly.
So that even complicates it one more step.
That's right.
So someday, Zechariah 12 through 14 tell us Jerusalem's going to be the issue that produces Armageddon.
Absolutely.
And so...
Well, I love Zechariah 12:3. Jerusalem becomes a burdensome stone.
Right.
And I think it's 12:9. Anybody that attempts to divide or parcel or anything to do with Jerusalem will be dealt with forcefully, leading into Zechariah 13 and 14, Armageddon. So, as W.A. would say, Jerusalem's God's prophetic time clock, and that every leader in the world, I'd say virtually every leader in the world, favors the division of Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And that will lead to those final conflicts.
Well, so in your book, you talk about the specific natural disasters that happened when America tried to force Israel to give up land. So since you wrote your book, there have been others. So again, and I want to say to people, the thing I love about prophecy is it's empirical. The Bible's very specific about things that will happen, and the fulfillments are very specific, hundreds of very specific examples. Well, this is one of them. In Joel 3, when God says, I'm coming to bring judgment against the nations because of the way you've treated my people Israel, you've divided up my land. And so what Bill has done is you've just looked at the facts of what America has done to try to force Israel to give up land, and at the same time, the natural disasters that have happened. Okay, so talk about some of those.
Well, Jimmy, starting at the perfect storm when 30-foot waves were crashing into President George Herbert Walker Bush's home as he's at the podium of Madrid, Spain, calling for Israel to give back the land they obtained in the War of Self-Defense in 1967.
That's right.
I mean, literally at the moment, he's calling for renewed peace talks and for Israel to give up Judea, Samaria, East Jerusalem, and additional land. 30-foot waves at the moment were crashing into his home, causing almost $1 million worth of damage. 17 days before 9/11, George W. Bush was working with Crown Prince Abdullah on what was going to be the most comprehensive address ever by an American president to be given to the UN a few weeks later. And that work was done on 9/10. And they were going to call for division of Jerusalem, fulfilling of the UN resolutions 242 and 338, and also two states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace and security. Prince Bandar, who had worked, the Saudi ambassador to the U.S., who had worked very closely with Bush, Colin Powell, and the Crown Prince, was celebrating at his home in McLean, Virginia, his mansion there, on the evening of 9/10, and he woke up in the next morning to the horror of the fact that 15 of the 18 terrorists that ran planes into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon were Saudis.
Wow.
And I mention this often when I speak. The God of Israel did not produce the evil of 9/11, but he did not stop it.
Right.
His land was about to be given into a Palestinian state, or the movement into a Palestinian state. So George W. had one other thing, Hurricane Katrina. Right after 9,500 Jews were forcefully taken from their homes and synagogues in 24 settlements in Gaza and 4 in northern Samaria. President Bush congratulated Ariel Sharon on this courageous decision to evict Jewish people from their homes and synagogues, and within a couple hours, Katrina began, just off a remnant of a storm near the Bahamas, which most of the major storms start off the west coast of Africa. This was an unreal event that turned into an absolute monster. A friend of mine had been at the White House for 30 years as a correspondent. She said, George W. Bush never got over the consequences of 9/11 and Hurricane Katrina.
Yeah.
It was devastating to him. And then, Obama continued his pressure. We had massive tornado outbreaks. That was interesting. And during Bush and Trump, most of the major events were hurricanes. Record-setting, retiring hurricanes that were so enormous that the names were retired. And then during Obama's 8 years, it was tornado outbreaks, record tornado outbreaks. And right at the time, they're pressuring Israel to give up their covenant land.
Yeah.
And one hurricane, I'll mention this real quick, Jimmy, because it's kind of interesting, is on September 1st and 2nd, 2010, Obama had brought in Mubarak, Abdullah from Jordan, Abbas from the Palestinians, and Netanyahu, and they were going to put a big force on Israel to do a peace deal. And I mean, this was an international effort. But for somehow, at that time, there was a hurricane called Earl that was so big, it was the size of Texas, going towards Washington, D.C. And on September 2nd, Netanyahu and Hillary Clinton both said, we will not pressure the sides. The Israelis and Palestinians do what they don't want to do. Earl went from a Category 5 to a 2 almost immediately and went back to the ocean.
Wow. Wow.
Unbelievable. And I have all the meteorology reports in the book on that. And the book, Eye to Eye, goes through Trump's first major catastrophe, which was Hurricane Harvey that devastated southern Texas. And that I found out that Kushner, his son-in-law, was moving all across. He was in Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and he was in Abu Dhabi, and he was in Jordan and Egypt, trying to get the Arabs, the Muslims, to go along with his plan of dividing the land. And that's when Hurricane Harvey developed out of a remnant, became second or third costliest hurricane in U.S. history. So, and then one other note here, Jimmy, in 2020, first of all, January 28, 2020, when Trump had everything in the world going for him before that date, presented his peace plan, the Kushner-Trump peace plan. He was going to call for 70 to 80% to be a future Palestinian state. And it was moving back into the peace process, and coronavirus, literally started breaking out significantly that day. And, it was and then that summer, up until the signing of the Abraham Accords 2015, we had record hurricanes one after another. We had so many hurricanes and tropical storms that summer. During the time of negotiation, when they were negotiating, it was calm. But when they were negotiating, these ferocious storms were developing. They ran out of names. They started using alpha, beta, delta, gamma. They had so many storms. They had the name storms through the Z's, and then they were into it. So, and really, we've documented that.
And you can just go and look specifically in when Ian hit Florida, Biden was giving a speech at the United Nations at that moment, calling for a two-state solution.
Last September, absolutely.
So talk about the freeze, because the freeze last year in Dallas was just incredibly bad with Texas.
Well, actually, it was, I think it was February 2021, actually, Jimmy, so about 2 years from now.
Yeah.
People couldn't believe it. Texas,
It's horrible.
This polar vortex, or what do they call it?
Yeah.
Unbelievable. I mean, knocked power out here.
Yeah.
Cost up, I've heard up to billions of dollars worth of damage, disrupted the economy, shut Texas down. And at that time, when that happened, even though Texas is along with Tennessee, are probably two of the greatest supporter states of Israel, that storm devastated Texas. And because of solar energy, because of the wind turbines were stopped in West Texas, Texas had an energy crisis. But Biden did 4 things that week: reestablishing the Palestinian office in Washington, D.C., reestablishing funding of UNRWA, also telling his UN ambassador we're going to have to start moving forward in the peace talks, and just basically bringing the Palestinians back into the mix. Where Trump did the plan and just said, this is what we're going to do, Biden officially that week was bringing the Palestinians back in with money, funding, and commitment at the UN and at the State Department level.
Wow. You know, the people need to understand, because someone said to me one time, well, how come the president makes a decision and it affects all of us? Parents make decisions, it affects the children.
That's so true.
Mayors make decisions, it affects the citizens. But now we're talking about the President of the United States, and we're talking about the apple of God's eye. We're talking about Israel and Jerusalem. And again, Joel 3, this is an end-time scripture, and God says, behold, in those days and at that same time, when I bring back the captives of Judah and Jerusalem, which was 1948, I'm going to enter into judgment with the nations on account of my heritage, my people, Israel, whom they've scattered among the nations, and you've divided up my land. Well, God calls it his land. And so the Jewish people have this tiny piece of land in the Middle East that they've never been able to rest in. The good news is we'll be able to rest in that land one day. When Jesus returns, when the millennial kingdom, they're going to rest in that land, we're going to rest in that land. But for now, this is a heavy stone, a burdensome stone for the nations. No one can agree on it. But there are consequences. This is what I love about your book. If you just want to look at the black and white issues of the importance of the way you vote, this is it right here. Is because it doesn't matter if they're Republican or Democrat. It matters if they're pro-Israel or anti-Israel.
That's right.
And you can say all day long that you're pro-Israel, but when you're calling for a two-state solution, you're anti-Israel.
Absolutely.
You're on the wrong side of the equation.
Yeah, this is, as you know, Jimmy, the scriptures are very specific. That the Jewish people have a covenant, the Abrahamic covenant, that's an everlasting covenant. And no Israeli leader, no world leader has the right to determine the boundaries of God's covenant land, which is in Genesis 15:18. And anybody that attempts to, like Joel 3:2 that you're alluding to, part his land or disperse his people, there's going to be consequences. Zechariah 12:3 again, Jerusalem becomes a burdensome stone. So our American presidents really, and I document all the way back to Woodrow Wilson, who supported the San Remo Agreement of 1920-22, all the way up to President Trump, and where they stood with the Jewish people in the state of Israel, those who were blessed, those who were cursed. Yeah. It's a very interesting story. And despite the fact, the European have put a lot of pressure on the Israelis, but most of the peace process has been the United States and the Israelis and the Palestinians. So a majority of these consequences have happened here. They've happened in Europe too. I could write a shorter book on Europe. Yeah. But the key is this is God's land. No one has the right to determine it. And I noticed the greater the pressure, the greater the corresponding catastrophes. You could almost feel a collective fury or fire of the God of Israel when they talk about putting an Arab state in Judea and Samaria in a capital in East Jerusalem. Yeah. And it's just, and we've got the scriptures to support it.
You bet. Well, it's happening. It's happening in the world. This is reality. And one day soon, unfortunately, I believe that we're going to get raptured out one day. There's going to be a covenant with the Antichrist and Israel for 7 years. And during that time, there's going to be pressure put on Israel to give up East Jerusalem, to give up, whatever it is, but especially Jerusalem.
Right.
Because, Zechariah 12 is so specific about Jerusalem, and the Jews won't do it.
Right.
If they would do it, there would be no need for Armageddon.
Right.
But they're not going to do it, and so there's going to be a military effort by the United States to impose a two-state solution on Israel, which ends up being Armageddon. And it's just happening. It's happening right now. I really appreciate the work you've done on this. Now, Bill, your website is called watch.org.
Yeah, that's our website on the internet. Is watch.org, watch.org.
It's a great news site. I look at it every day. And Bill, you gather from different resources as well as your own, but you do a great job of just kind of talking about what's important.
Absolutely.
Especially with Israel as the focus. So I encourage you to get Bill's book, Eye to Eye. William Koenig, Facing the Consequences of Dividing Israel. And Bill, I want you to come back and be with me because I want to talk more about Israel and what's going on. Thank you for being with me today.
Thank you,
God
Jimmy.
bless you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you guys for joining us here on the Tipping Point Show. I'll see you next time. God bless you.